The Age this morning is actually about not the biggest story at the moment, but one that's going to have really significant consequences for manufacturing and for the economy in this country.
Yeah, 2,600 workers at the Altona plant, the Altona Toyota manufacturing plant yesterday for the very final time walked on site at 6 a.m. and then at about midday finished their shift. A sad day for obviously those people and their families, but it will also have ramifications around the rest of the economy. The thing that I was reflecting on as I was looking at this story yesterday and today is that I hope it is as easy as possible for these people to find work somewhere else, because a lot of them are still in prime working age, they still have families to support and mortgages to pay off.
And skill sets.
Exactly. And some of those will be transferable. A lot of those skills will be transferable to other industries, but that's a large number of people for a pretty small economy, particularly in that part of Melbourne. So a sad day for them, but I think it's an interesting reflection on the failure of government policy now over a number of years. So all strength to their arm in finding new
What do you say the failure is?
Well, I think that, look, the one great thing is that they've been given time. So 4 years ago this was announced, so it's been good that they've been given time to go and get training in other areas and to reskill. But the failure, I think, is basically in saying to people who worked at these places, there is hope for you into the future. The reality is that car manufacturing in Australia was always going to die a death because we're not as good at manufacturing cars as other countries are. We're just not as specialised in that area. And that's okay because we're really good at other things. But it does mean that I think that the subsidies that went into making these jobs stick around for longer than they might have naturally means that it gave people a bit more hope than I think was really there. So it was an artificial sort of sense of hope, which is a sad thing, I think.
Let's talk about what's in the Fin Review this morning. Directors slam APRA's unfettered powers. We're talking about the prudential regulator here.
Yeah. So
what exactly is the critique?
So the critique of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, which does some really terrific work, particularly when it comes to the rule of law, is that the new banking executive accountability regime is giving powers to APRA which are new. They're unprecedented, and they're also vague. So one of the obligations is that banking executives operate and deal with APRA in an open way. And what exactly that means is really difficult to grasp. I mean, we're talking about a legal concept here, but if it's ambiguous, you've got to wonder how significant these powers are, how far they're going to go. Is it going to mean that you've got to turn over diary notes, personal diary notes that you make in the course of your work, etc.? There aren't many other industries that are subject to this sort of accountability. So,
but there aren't many industries that have the support of us, the taxpayers,
sure.
In terms of the big four.
Yep, that's a very good
Therefore,
point.
you might argue they should have to sort of be more open, and perhaps that openness might be open to determination.
Yeah,
as time goes by.
The banks have a friend this morning in the form of Simon. So
and I think,
nice.
well, I think banks are important, right? I mean, without banks being able to provide finance, a lot of people wouldn't be able to buy homes.
No one's saying they're not. But if there's a tightening of the prudential regulations around them.
Yeah, I think the question is this regulation the right way to go? Is it going to solve what problem are you trying to solve?
Is it the right way in your view?
Well, I don't think that that throwing rule of law principles by the wayside is ever a good way to go, whether you're talking about banking regulation or anything else. So accountability and transparency are important ideas, but you also have to be making sure that you're treating people fairly, that you're maintaining the principles that make our legal system strong.
It's nice to see them upholding rule of law and all the principles that we're now expected to grant them as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the very least, as Virginia has said, one of the things that was pointed out in this story is if you're going to make a determination, you've at least got to be able to appeal it.
Yeah, and I would imagine that as the discussion goes on, that'll be refined and something like that would be introduced, you'd imagine.
I hope so.
Well, let's bookmark today, and we'll go back in 6 months' time and see.
Continuing on from the discussion we were having about industrial relations, there's a new report now that's been put out by a Senate committee that's been looking into the decision of the Fair Work Commission to reduce Sunday penalty rates in 4, I think it was, or maybe 5 industries or awards. Unsurprisingly, the ALP majority report has said that that decision should be reviewed, that legislation should come in to overturn that decision. But also that there should be a stronger better off test under the enterprise bargaining awards regime. So
that's a bit of a switch, isn't it? Rather than a not worse off test, a better off test.
Yeah. So they just want to make sure that people are better off, and they want to make sure that it's really clear. I mean, they've got a good point in the sense that it's difficult to make that determination. I mean, these are really complex negotiations. You can't. Once you look at one aspect of a deal, pay, you then got to look at conditions. But it's so much more complicated than that because conditions, of course, can mean a whole range of things.
Yes.
Now, there's a story on page 8 of The Australian about political inertia in Australia.
What?
Who would have thought?
Where? Find me that political inertia, Simon. Behind the couch.
We're talking about Indigenous recognition here, though.
Yeah, so Indigenous recognition really is pretty much dead now. I mean, it's off the agenda, at least in its original form. The original idea was that there would be something put into the Constitution which recognises that Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, were here first. You can't argue with that. That's of course true. That's a historical fact. But given that that's just an obvious historical fact, the Referendum Council, which was the most recent iteration of a body that's looking at changing the Constitution, said, well, that's not enough. We actually need something else. And then this idea was presented to Bill Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull that there be an Indigenous body inserted into the Constitution to represent Indigenous interests. That was a proposal which Malcolm Turnbull said was light on detail, there wasn't enough meat on the bones, and Megan Davis, in a speech today, one of the Referendum Council members, has made the point that there's no meat on the bones of another proposal which is currently before the Australian people, the same-sex marriage survey. I think, look, I understand her point, but the same-sex marriage question is quite simple. Should the law be changed?
What's the IPA's view on that?
Well, there's no IPA position on it. No.
Just I mean,
individuals have got various views on it, but there's no IPA.
Do you believe it should be changed?
No, I'm of the view. I think the Gillard reforms interestingly made the case for same-sex marriage a lot weaker than it would be otherwise, because essentially heterosexual and same-sex couples are on the same footing now. Really what we're talking about is just the word. So given that it's not really about legal rights now, it's about the word, I think that the consequences of a change are much more significant.
We'll leave it there, Simon. We're out of time, but good to see you again.
Great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay healthy. Now, some of the music industry's biggest stars have paid tribute to the American musician Tom Petty, who died yesterday at the age